So today I'm going to be doing a brake service on a 2020 Kona electric. These brakes don't see much use because of the way I drive with the electric regen braking. So I actually have two sets of rotors. These are the OEM ones that came on the car. I got them machined at the shop. The shop I'm at to put these on doesn't have a lathe, a brake lathe, so I've sent them away. So I have two sets of rotors. These ones on here I put on in November, which was 5 months ago, and about 8,000 kilometers. And these ones in here are aftermarket, front and rear. And then I got those machined so I can keep swapping them out because they get all pitted and rusty. These ones aren't too bad. I'm going to inspect them more when we take off the wheels. But we're going to show you how to take out the pads, do all that stuff, lube up the slider pins and stuff. And yeah, it's just these cars don't see much movement with the brakes, especially the way I drive. So it just, in a wet or snowy climate, it really takes a toll on the rotors, slider pins, pads, and brackets.
All right, so we got the scanner hooked up here, and we'll go down to your anti-lock brakes and electronic skid control. From there we can go down to system tests and find brake pad change mode. So it says test description: before changing brake pad, this function should be performed. This will allow you to push the piston into the caliper by retracting the spindle nut with actuator. While pad change mode is in progress, text message is displayed at cluster. After changing brake pad, apply release function should be executed 3 times. The engine off and ignition on.
So if you heard that, that's the parking brake retracting all the way.
So we can see there it says test completed.
And what's the point of doing this?
So that's just so if we had to, if we need some room to get the calipers off of the brake pads, that's going to let us push the piston back in the caliper. You really need it if you're going to do brand new pads, and you need that extra room again, so you got to push the caliper back. It's not so bad if you're doing a service. I think you might be able to sneak the caliper off, but to do it properly, this is the proper way to do it. All right, so first thing, we got our vehicle lifted up, and we're going to take all the wheel nuts off. So you need a 21mm socket.
So how are these looking?
Not too terrible. I mean, for our climate, kind of rusty, but par for the course. The back brake pads look like they're getting worn down. Did we just change rotors the last time?
Yep, just rotors.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like they're wearing evenly. We'll see once we get the brake calipers off. Let's take a look at the front. Yeah, so you still have quite a bit of pad material still left on the front. It's good that we're servicing them now, though. Like every 6 months, you almost have to here. Usually get a lot of rust that builds up underneath of these clips, and then it actually just compresses the brake pad, and the brake pad will drag, and you'll get marks like these, striations that'll start on the rotor, and that's basically how it starts. Once you get those striations in the rotor and the rust starts to build up, it works its way from the edge inwards, and then the rotor has problems dissipating heat, ends up warping, all kinds of nasty problems, tears up the brake pads. All right, so we're gonna take the back brake caliper off, you'll need a 14mm wrench. You could probably do it with a socket and an extension as well if you had one. Now there's a connector up here. I think I'm gonna undo that just to avoid pulling on any wires or possibly breaking the connector. All right, so I was having some difficulty getting that connector off, so I just decided to leave it, and looks like there's enough room. But yeah, just be cautious. Moving on, as far as the brake pads go, you've got some springs that need to come out here. Grab a flathead screwdriver or something, just get some leverage underneath of these things. They just pop out. So the purpose of these springs is when you apply the brakes and then let go, the springs just help get back the pad off of the rotor so the brake pads aren't dragging. Usually when you buy a new set of brake pads, they'll come with those. Not all the time though. So those brake pads were, this one was actually pretty free. This back one is stuck in here.
It's already
real bad.
It's already stuck in.
Yeah.
And we serviced these 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, so due for another service. Usually when you take these brake pads out, try to pry against the metal and not the friction material. Sometimes they can chip or break away. All right, so now we're going to take apart the front calipers. Same size bolt, 14mm. Sometimes these bolts can get stuck in the slider pins, like the threads themselves. So if that happens to you and you're trying to take the bolt out and the slider pin starts to spin with the bolt, you just hold it with a wrench or keep it from spinning.
I'm just gonna set the caliper over there.
Yeah, so good practice is to use like a bungee cord or something.
Hang it up on the...
Yeah, there is like cords or brackets that you can buy that'll hold the caliper in place. You never want to leave the caliper dangling and put stress on the brake hose. So on these clips, there's actually little like retaining tabs that you can see that stop the pad from coming out. So don't force the pad or it'll fold those backwards. Just want to push up on it just a little bit so you can get that out. Take a look at the brake pad. You can see those score lines there in the brake pad.
And what's that from? Hanging up a bit?
Probably just getting stuck. You'll get some dirt and debris that gets in here.
Yeah.
You can see that how it's been building up. So as this pad sits in the cradle, there's a ledge for dirt to build up on in here. And as you're driving, it'll end up, I guess, getting pushed into the pad. And that wears into the brake pad. Can end up scoring the rotor. That one's a little worse. You can see some pitting starting on the outside.
Oh yeah, that one doesn't
All
look the
along
best. Yeah. And that's 5 months of use, like 8,000 kilometers.
Yep. Check these pins to make sure that they're free and they can slide back and forth nice.
That's pretty good.
Yep. So those are okay.
Check the boots, make sure they're not ripped.
Yep. A lot of times, like, the boots will get ripped or rust will build up around them, and it ends up allowing moisture to get in, and then that's how the pins end up seizing up. And what'll happen is when the pin seize up, the caliper can't float properly, so you'll have one brake pad that wears out and one brake pad that doesn't wear out. So usually you'll have one that looks like this, and then the other one will just be metal pretty much, or pretty close to it. So these are the brake pads from the driver's front corner. We can see the inner one, there's a little bit less friction material than the outer one. So it looks like we're probably sitting at just under 7 millimeters, and the outer one just under 10.
And then here's the one with less material came off the inside, and there's the rotor. Doesn't look too good, but I mean, we're gonna leave these rotors on for the summer and then swap them out and get them machined in the fall.
So for the front brake caliper bracket bolts on the back, there's 2 bolts. They're 17 millimeter bolts. Perfect, so now we got our bracket off, and we can go take the other side off. I'll show you how to take the back ones off.
And to remove the disc, if you ever want to, you just take out that Phillips head screw, the 2 of them, and the disc just comes off.
All right, so now we're going to take the back caliper brackets off, and there's 2 bolts on the back as well. They are 14 millimeter bolts, so we can go ahead and break those loose and take them off. Make sure you have your ratchet on off. Oh yeah, pro tip. If you're taking these bolts out, I like to break them both loose before I take one completely out. So you don't have your face in front of the caliper bracket bolt and then go to loosen it and it smashes you in the face. Know that from experience. The bottom is a bit tight. That's what the bracket looks like. And I'm just gonna take the other side off so we got all the brackets. And then I'll show you what to do to service them. Okay, so we've got the bracket, put it in the vise. There is a left and a right, but the brackets themselves are symmetrical. The reason that they're labeled left and right is the location of the slider pins. They run 2 different pins. So one's a solid pin, and the other one has a bushing on it. And there's a reason that they put the bushing on there, so that when you hit the brakes and the caliper wants to shift when it grabs a hold of the rotor, it dampens the blow of that shift of the caliper and doesn't make knocking noises, stuff like that. So there is a position to those. So this is a right side front bracket, and if we were looking at it on the vehicle, the pin with the damper would be at the top. Okay, so now that we have everything here on the bench, just gonna go ahead and take these clips off, and you can see some rust that started underneath of the clips.
And that one has anti-seize. That one, the right one, looks okay.
Yeah. And that's the main reason that the brake pads get tight. Either rust builds up underneath the clips and it pushes the clips out towards the pad, which constricts the pad and prevents it from sliding freely in the holder. Or on the brake pad itself, you'll get rust build up on the edges in here. And that's also, that's going to take up space as well and cause those brake pads to get stiff in the holders, keep them from moving freely. So now once we get all the clips taken off, we can go in there and clean everything out and clean these clips up nice. They usually come with a coating on them from factory. I'm not too sure about these ones. Yeah, you can see the coating starting to peel off on this one.
Oh yeah.
And once the coating comes off, then it's susceptible to rust. And if you live somewhere that you got to deal with rust, like us, then
You're always doing them.
yeah, you got to stay on top of keeping these things clean. Otherwise, you'll go through a set of brakes in no time. Cool. So on the back caliper brackets, there is just 2 solid pins with no bushings. When you go to free these up, just give them a wipe off, clean them up. And the lube that you're going to want to use is a silicone based lube. So stay away from anything petroleum based or oil based. And the reason for that is these rubbers will swell if you don't use something that's silicone based.
And brake greases will be silicone based usually.
Yeah.
Brake lubricant.
And you don't have to put a whole lot on either. Okay, so now I'm just going to use a sandblasting cabinet to clean up the contact surfaces where those clips sit in the brake caliper brackets.
You can do this with like a wire brush, right?
Yep, you could use a wire brush if you didn't have access to this. Anything to get the rust off. I would avoid using screwdriver or file. Anything that's going to gouge the surface. Not recommended. All right, so we got the brackets all cleaned up with the bead blaster or the sand blaster, and did the clips as well. Got all the rust off of them, so they're all cleaned up. Now we just got to put some anti-seize in underneath to prevent the rust from coming back, and put the clips back on. And once we get that all together, go from there. nice. So here's some torque specs in case you want to see what they're torqued to. I'm going to show you torquing the front and rear, all the bolts that you'll get into. Let's see, we want to do the caliper brackets. So assembly to knuckle, you can see
72 foot-pounds.
Yep. So the front one's going to be 86.8 foot-pounds and 72. The rear one's 72.3.
So what's this one?
So this one we're going to do 87.
And those are the front caliper mount bolts.
For the rear.
72 foot-pounds for the rear.
All right, so now that we've dealt with our brackets and those are all cleaned up and put on the car and torqued, I'm gonna clean up these brake pads. So we wanna make sure that we get around these edges here so that they're nice and clean and free. Also, I like to give these plates on the back a wipe down, make sure that they're clean. And we're gonna just scuff up the surface a little bit with some sandpaper, nothing too coarse. And also another important thing is these channels. You want to make sure they're clear. The reason that they're there is for they're vents for gassing. When you're slowing down from a high rate speed, you'll actually get gas that builds up between the brake pad and the rotor, and that needs somewhere to go. So you can see these, they get filled up full of dust, and then that compacts into hard brake friction material. So you'll want to make sure that those get cleaned out nice. So I'm just going to use a hacksaw blade. We got the snap-on, only the finest.
It's a lot in there, wow.
Yep, should be nice and clean like that.
So here we have the pads cleaned up and sandblasted the part that slides. Also just putting copper anti-seize on little nubs there.
All right, so now that you got your brake pads all cleaned up, ready to be installed, there is one brake pad that has a shim. That's the caliper side. That's gonna go on the inside. And the other brake pad goes on the outside. You can hear them click past those tabs. They're in place. You can see it's nice and free now. And of course, friction material goes towards the inside surface of the rotor. just like that.
Putting copper anti-seize on the contacts parts.
Yeah.
Springs go in.
Yeah, if you don't know which way the brake pads go in, you probably shouldn't be working on it. Hope you're working on the braking system. Actually, you know what? Knowledge yourself. Learn. So we got the brake caliper on there. Everything looks like it's sitting where it should be. And last thing, we got our 2 bolts here that secure the brake caliper to the slider pins, which are in the brake caliper bracket. We can start those, and then we'll torque those down. They're the same torque front and back. They are 23.1 foot-pounds. All right, so we got the back brakes, brake pads. The shims on the outside look similar, but this one, you can see the mark in it. There is a sort of a dowel that sticks out, and you'll notice on the brake caliper, on the piston itself, there's 4 slots. So that's where you would install the tool to wind back the caliper. But if you do end up doing that because you're changing your brake pads, just keep in mind to line up one of those spots to the bottom, so that when your brake pads are sitting in the holder and you slide the caliper on, that groove slides over the dowel. Otherwise, you'll be fighting with the thing and wondering why the brake caliper isn't going on. That's why. Nice and free in there now. Yeah, those like little tabs that stick up in there. If you did end up bending them, taking the brake pads out, you know, just take some pliers, straighten them back out. Everything looks like it's sitting where it's supposed to be. All right, so we've got the brake pads in there. Just gonna put these springs in. It's nice too, those little tabs that stick up keep the pads from flying out.
When the springs get put in.
Yeah. Just take your time with it. Sometimes it'll get in an awkward situation and bind, or not be in the right spot to slide into its home. Just have some patience with it. Take your bolts now and start those. And we can torque from there. Okay, so now we're going to torque down these bolts to hold the brake caliper on. They just get torqued to 23.6, I think it was. Not very much. All right, so we got all the brake service all done up now, so we'll tighten up our wheel nuts. I do have this gun on the lowest setting, by the way. I'm going to hand torque all the wheels.
94 foot-pounds. Okay, so once we're done and all the wheels are back on, we just have to cycle the brakes 3 times. So unplug the scanner, turn the car on, hit the brake pedal 3 times, and then try the parking brake. There, it's good. You can hear it takes a long time for it to engage. Disengage, and you're good to go.